welcome and bienvenue and welcome back to the modding of Isaac with Lyte. And today, we're gonna be popping popcorn with lasers! Okay, maybe not popping popcorn, but we're gonna pop all sorts of enemies. We're gonna shoot lasers out of our little baby face, and it'll be awesome. Not just one laser, but 4 lasers in a potentially configurable direction. So let's just get started so you can see what I actually mean by that. So if we start ourselves a new run, let's be, I don't know, let's be Samson for a change. We're always Isaac or Lorem or whatnot, so let's be Samson for a change. And here we are, we've got 2 really hideous looking items. I didn't spend a lot of time on the artwork this time, but you get the gist. It's a plus, it's an X, it's a plus, it's an X. So if we pick up this plus, shabamo! We charge up and we fire angel stuff. And if we hit the spacebar, because this is an active item, mind you, this is not a passive. It just happens to give you a passive effect because it doesn't matter. You can give passive effects with active items. And then if we hit spacebar, shboop, it's an X, and we fire in an X. Pretty nice, ain't it? Nice, nice, nice. And then we just come into a room, doesn't fire just yet, and then we go, be gone, heathens. And it seems really quite good. It's rather powerful. It takes damage quite a bit. Oh, sacrifice room. We're gonna play for just a little bit because I want to show you a couple of the features. For example, if we give ourselves Spoonbender now, C3. Oh, it died. It does, in fact, home without any additional code. I did not add any special anything for the case of having Spoonbender. So no matter what gives you homing, these shots will, in fact, home. If we come in here, it's the Hunt. I don't know if he'll be able to stand up to our barrages. But he's a boss, so he's got a lot of hit points. And if we hit him, it didn't do a whole lot of damage. So if we give item C4, Cricket's head, now it deals quite a bit more damage, eh? Now, I didn't set it to tick faster with a higher tier rate, but instead, if we give ourselves soy milk, C330. Our damage went way down, but we charge nigh on instantaneously. Might as well pick up Latchkey. And I'm sure there's one other thing you're certainly asking yourselves. Does it work with Guppy? So let's get to getting Guppy. C133 is the paw, we don't want the paw. We'll take the tail. 187's the hairball. Let's go with 9 lot. Dead cat. 81. So we've got Guppy. And we walk into a room, hopefully with enemies this time. And we get tons and tons of flies. Tons. So it would seem that the ticks of damage may have gone up, because normally it doesn't deal quite that much. But as you can see, even with soy milk, it's still pretty powerful. So let's get to the code so you can see exactly how this is done. So in items.xml, we made a couple of items. And if you notice, there were 2 items. Let's head back in Isaac. Let's see if this is an active item. It is! So we've got the poop. If we pick up this, it says Inner Beauty, a light shines within. We hit the space bar, and it's the X, and we pick it up, and it says Inner Beauty, the light shines within. It's a weird little feat. It's got the same exact name. Or does it? Well, it turns out that spaces matter. So you can name two items the exact same thing, but it ever so slightly different, and they will look exactly the same when you pick them up. You put the spaces on the outside so it doesn't jostle it from left to right, but it'll look the same. Blank space is blank. And so I made just simple active items with a 0 charge because no room charge. Simple thing, you just add the images, you add the description. It's the same as we've done several times before, but with the one difference, they seem to have the same name, but it's ever so slightly different. Such that when we come over into main.lua, when we set up our items, use one that's totally normal and one that's got a little extra space on the sides. Such we have two that seem identical. Standard boilerplate up top, we added inner beauty just as an empty table for putting things in. I added a couple of constants. One is the laser type, and it's for the holy laser. That's number 5. This is not documented anywhere, at least not in the documentation. If you go to the Modding of Isaac subreddit, there is a post on using, if you do a search for this entity laser.shoot angle, there's a very good post that talks about what this is, what each part does, and particularly the variance of the lasers. Because if you set the variant too high, boom, game crashes. So be economical with your use of laser variants. Holy is 5, the regular brimstones are lower. You can do this with tech, but that's just a constant that we're going to use. Laser duration, another constant. It's how long it stays on the screen, and I also use it for determining the cooldown for the next charge. Okay? So that's just our initialization. Now we're going to jump down to the bottom, because the bottom is the easy part. Down here, we've got the active item. There are 2. One for the X, one that isn't. They're very incredibly simple items. All they do is when you use the plus, it hops up here, grabs the player, removes the plus, and then adds the X. No charge, because it's a no charge thing, and then it doesn't give any consumables, because of course it doesn't. And then when you use the X, you come up to Beauty 2, so on Beauty 2. Grab the player, you remove the X, you add the plus. That's all there is to it. You can make an active item that passes itself around for other active items. So if you wanted to make an active item that was a 6-room charge, but each time you use it, it changes into something else, you can do that. You can have a suite of items that rotate either sequentially or randomly. You could have an active item like Purity that it'll give you damage until you use it, and then it changes over to Speed, or it switches over to Tears. That way you can be in control of which stat you want at a particular time. All you would need is to keep naming them with more and more spaces on the outside. They all seem to have the same name. They're all slightly different. So that's how you do a carousel of active items. It's really quite simple, and then to give the passive effects, you do that in an MC post P effect update. A lot of people I keep seeing are using post update or post render and then grabbing the player, which is needless when it gives you the player when you do the post passive effect update. So please use these whenever possible. I know most of the people who are doing that only watched episode 3, and y'all are awesome for watching this video. So we've got a post P effect update here. Gives you the player. As always, I initialize stuff first. So we grab the player data. We're attaching it to the player in case someday we can have 2 very distinct players. Right now it doesn't matter, but in the future, who knows? Then, if the beauty frame is nil, then set it to 0. So that's counting the frames of the charge. And then beauty cool, if it's nil, you set that to 0. That's the cooldown. After you fire, you can't start charging immediately while it's still firing. So we have a cooldown as well. Okay? Beginning of run, standard first frame things, spawn the items in the room, done it a million times. Now, we charge the shop. This is incredibly similar to the Little Azazel episode, but instead of charging a little familiar, we're charging ourselves. So if our current active item, so get active item, this is a function, so you need the parentheses, equals our item or our other item. So we need to check the active item twice against each of our different items, because if we have either of them, we need to act as though we have Brimstone. So if that is true, then we set the fire delay to be the max fire delay. When you do that, they will not fire tears. They will not fire anything. I'll have to double check a couple of things, but they will not fire. Step one. It's a very important step one, and I know a lot of people were looking for it, but that's how you do it. You could set it to some arbitrary number, but this is a reasonable number if for some reason it goes back to firing tears again. So if you wanted to use something like kidney stone, where it temporarily causes charge shots, this would keep it in line with how you're supposed to be able to fire. Okay? Now, if their fire direction is greater than -1, I really should write this back. Direction dot no direction. Always use enumerations when possible. It makes your code a whole lot easier to read. Because you saw that -1 and you're like, -1? Well, -1 just happens to be the value of no direction, as opposed to left, up, right, or down. And so you check whether or not they're pressing in a firing direction and that the cooldown is 0. We are not in the process of cooling down anymore. And then you try to charge. So you take your current frame and increment it by 1. Now I use this math.min because if it tries to go beyond a full charge, you just leave it at a full charge. I have the full charge being max fire delay times 2 because that seems like a good fire time to me. You can set your own. I personally like having it adjust to their tier stat. So that's why I have it here. This 2 could be yet another constant that you set somewhere else for configuration purposes. And then we use that same value here for figuring out the offset for the color, because I set them to a nice bright white instead of doing an animation, because it didn't seem right for them to do the Brimstone cheek puff thing when they're trying to send out holy rays of light. It would probably be better to have a custom animation, but it's beyond the scope of this episode. So all we do is we set the color, we set the offset instead of the tint. So it starts at 0. We have no offset when the frame is 0. Because 0 times all this stuff divided by all that stuff is still 0. Now, this bottom part is the maximum charge that we set up here. And consequently, when this gets to the maximum charge, this whole bit over here is 1. 1 times 255 is 255, which is the maximum offset. And that just works up linearly from there. But you need this math.ceil. It's the ceiling. You could use floor. I like ceiling. That makes it a whole number. If you try to send something that isn't a whole number, it'll treat it like 0. And you'll end up with an epilepsy-inducing flash. You don't want it. Make sure you send it whole numbers. And then it only exists for 1 frame. And then we set the rest to zeros and falses because we don't need it to fade. We don't need it to do anything fancy. But we put this 1 here such that we don't have to unset the color later. If we're charging, it sets the color. If we're not, poof, back to normal. So that's how we charge. We add on to our frame, we set our color. All there is to it. You don't go beyond the maximum charge. Okay, so that's charging. What happens if you are not charging? Well, you check if you're fully charged. So your charge frame is the maximum. I put this debug string in here because it's important to know in the log when things happen. You don't have to leave it here. But there was a little bit where it was acting funny. If you add Isaac.debug string and then something, it'll let you know if it's doing what you expect. And that's an important part of debugging. When something doesn't work quite right, have it tell you why. I mean, it doesn't tell you exactly why, but at least tells you how far into your code it gets, just in case you've got weird if statements that don't quite do what we had planned. So if you're fully charged, then you fire! What happens when you fire? Well, first you have to figure out which type of item you've got. Now I only do an if and an else here because we already checked for those two. And you can only have one, because it's an active item. Unless someone comes up with a magical way of having two active items. So if it's not one, then it's the other. So if it's the plus, then the base angle is 0. If it's the X, the base angle is 45 degrees. You just shift it 45 degrees, and it doesn't even matter which direction because we're pointing it in all directions. One can expect clockwise, but I haven't tested it myself, so poke around. So we set the base angle. Then, for angle equals base angle to the base angle plus 270 via 90. Do some things. So if the base angle is 0, it goes from 0 to 270 in steps of size 90. So 0, 90, 180, 270. 4 shots at 90 degree angles. If the base angle is 45, it goes from 45 to, what is that, 315? So 45, 135, 225, 315. And what do we do at each of those angles? We fire the lasers! So, since we have to modify the laser, we put it into a variable. Anytime you fire lasers, summon entities, do anything that makes a thing, it returns that thing to you. So you can toss it into a variable and work with it. So, entity laser.shoot angle. This is the first time we've actually worked with the raw class, because things are often lasers themselves, but this is the time we've asked, hey, Plato's ideal of the laser, could you do this for me? It's not a particular laser. It is all of laser kind. It is the fundamental being of lasers we're asking to do something. And we ask it to shoot at a particular angle. It's a little helper function, helps you with firing the lasers. So what are we going to fire? First, we have the variant, which we set up top. Then we have from where. We're firing it from the player's position. If we wanted, we could push it one way or another if you don't like the way it looks right now. But I like that they're all connected. I like the way it looks. Then the angle that we got from this loop. Then how long should it stay on the screen? You can change this duration. You could have this duration based on a particular stat. You could have it be random based on their luck. Do whatever you like. I set it to a constant because it's more what you're accustomed to. Then you've got the offset, because certain lasers you want coming out of a particular eye. The holy laser, it doesn't matter, no offset. And then who fired it? Because if the player fires it, it triggers guppy sorts of things. If the player doesn't fire it, then it doesn't. Really quite nice. Then we set the tier flags to be the player's tier flags, such that when you've got Spoonbender, when you've got any of the other things, it actually does what it's supposed to. It doesn't change the colors because that's a whole other thing. If you want it to change color when you've got Spoonbender, you have to check whether or not you've got Spoonbender or homing. I mean, you could change it purple for all homing. But then when you've got something like, is it Sacred Heart that gives you homing too? Do you really want it to be purple for Sacred Heart? I wouldn't think so. And then we set the collision damage to be the player's damage, such that it scales with your damage. You can add a multiplier here if you want. up or down. But this collision damage is how much damage it does when it hits them, and you scale it with the damage. And then we set the cooldown, because we just fired. We don't want to be able to charge up again right away. So you take your laser duration, I multiply it by 2, because that gives a nice feel for it. Fires, you wait a little bit, and then you can charge. Because the rays have a little shrinking effect, and you don't really want people to be able to charge while it's still shrinking. Again, this can be completely configurable to how you want it to go. I put an else here because you might want to do something if they undercharge it. You could fire it with less power, you could play a sad animation, you could make them take damage. Like if you have an overpowered item that has a charge, you could make it painful if they don't charge it properly. So there's a little space for doing that. And then you set the frame to be 0, because you are no longer charging it, the charge goes away. Poof. And then that's the end of this else if. You'll notice I always keep my ifs, my elses, and my ends in line with each other. If, else, end. If, else, end. Because it so often happens that you add an extra end or you leave an end out. Having it indented this way helps you tremendously in finding those sorts of errors. And then one last thing, the cooldown becomes the maximum of 0 or the cooldown minus 1, such that it goes all the way down to 0 and no further. You could add an extra if, but math.max takes care of it pretty darn easily. And so that's all the code necessary for making yourself a nice little Angel Fire item. It switches from plus to X, it scales with your damage, it takes your tier flags when you get extra items, it gives you flies when you're guppy. There are a couple of little caveats though. If we switch back to the game, there are a few things that I didn't quite harp on. Ooh, actually, we'll go back to the code for a second. Right here in the else if, I checked if the room's frame count was greater than 1. Because if you don't, it'll discharge your fire when you enter a new room. You are not holding a fire direction the instant you enter a room. It's a weird little thing, but you don't hold a direction when you enter a room. Don't know why. The other couple of things are if you're holding the shot and you take damage. So we walk into one of these. Here, eat up my flies. If you walk into them, for some reason it doesn't think you're holding a fire direction, and it procs the attack. I don't mind that. I kind of like that, where if you take damage, it's a panic attack. I'm perfectly okay with the panic attack. Now, we want to check a couple of things. Let's go with Brimstone. Let's see C118. What happens when you've got legit Brimstone? So it has both your attack and the Brimstone. So if you want to cancel out Brimstone, you'll need to do something else. Let's restart the run. Let's see what it does with technology. C68. Technology is fine, because technology is tier-based. Tech point 5 is 244. Tech point 5 still fires, because you're holding a direction, it doesn't care whether or not you actually fire. Let's restart it one more time and try Tech 2, because I don't want to get Tech 2 confused with Tech point 5. Tech 2 is 152. Now, Tech 2 also cares whether or not you're pressing the direction, not whether or not you're firing tiers. So if you need to stop that, that's another thing entirely. Let's go with chocolate milk, C69. So, chocolate milk still does what chocolate milk does. That one I'm not so fond of, because that means you can have both of these at the same time, and that's just no good. So we're going to need to find another way of stopping charged shots, which I don't know how to do offhand. So we can stop tiers, but secondary charge shots are a bit of a problem. So if you out there know how it's done, feel free to leave a comment down below and let us know, because these are the sorts of things that we need to learn together. So that probably means that Tech X 395 also fires. Yeah. So I don't particularly enjoy that either. So we need to find a way of canceling other charged items, because I want you to still be able to get it. I want there to be synergies with Tech X, but not with the actual Tech X shots. Unless, of course, we attach the Holy Light to the tier as it flies across, but even then, I think it would be better if we could cancel the charge shots too. So this is how you make the lasers. It's a little bit incomplete because there are a couple of little caveats with it, but it's a good place to start. And if you want your item to fire lasers, it's great, but this is not the final solution for charged shots. That's all I've got for this episode. I will see you in the next episode of the Modding of Isaac with Lyte.